The night felt heavier than usual inside the small, run-down apartment where silence never truly existed. Paint peeled from the walls, the heater barely worked, and the air carried the smell of cheap formula tins that were already empty. A single bulb flickered overhead as she sat on the edge of a worn-out couch, her baby crying nonstop in her arms. Each cry pierced her chest with guilt and fear. She gently rocked the baby, whispering apologies she didn't know how to fix. On the table in front of her lay a handful of coins, carefully counted again and again, as if the number might magically change. But it didn't. It was still not enough for even one box of formula. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone. Pride had already been swallowed hours ago. Hunger had a louder voice. She opened her messages and typed slowly, tears blurring the screen. The message was meant for a charity number she had saved weeks ago, but never dared to use. Every word felt humiliating, every sentence heavy with desperation. She paused before sending, her thumb hovering, heart pounding with shame. Then the baby cried louder, and without thinking further, she pressed send. Almost immediately, regret flooded her. She reread the number. Something felt wrong. Her breath caught as she realized it wasn't a charity contact at all. Panic spread through her body like fire. She imagined being mocked, reported, or ignored. Her face burned with embarrassment as she pulled the baby closer, rocking faster now. The room felt smaller, darker, closing in on her fears. She placed the phone face down, as if that could undo the mistake, and stared at the floor. In that moment, surrounded by silence broken only by her child's cries, she felt completely exposed, ashamed, terrified, and hopeless, unaware that a single wrong number was about to change everything. She hadn't planned her life to be this way. Years ago, love had seemed like a promise, something safe and bright, a world full of laughter and dreams that stretched endlessly ahead. But promises broke as easily as glass, and the man she had trusted vanished when life became difficult, leaving her with nothing but a small apartment, a baby in her arms, and the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every night, as she watched her child sleep fitfully, she remembered his words, the gentle smiles that turned to absence, the assurance that he would be there no matter what, and the emptiness that followed when he disappeared. That absence wasn't just his. It became the shadow over every decision she made, a constant reminder that she had to do it all alone, without any family to lean on. She had learned early on that independence wasn't a choice. It was survival. Friends faded when she admitted she was pregnant. Relatives, if they existed at all, offered advice rather than assistance. She worked jobs that demanded everything from her, long hours, heavy lifting, endless commuting, but the pay barely covered rent, let alone the growing expenses of raising a child. Yet she persisted, moving from one exhausting shift to the next, a perpetual cycle of fatigue and worry. There were mornings she woke with bruised arms from carrying groceries, her baby crying for breakfast she could barely afford, and nights she lay awake listening to every tiny whimper, afraid she would fail the one life that depended entirely on her. Society's judgment added another layer of struggle. Whispered comments, sidelong glances, and assumptions about her worth, character, or ability to be a good mother surrounded her like invisible chains. No one knew the endless nights of worry, the quiet tears shed after the baby fell asleep, or the prayers whispered into the dark for just one moment of relief. She carried the weight of these judgments along with her fear of failing her child, each day a balancing act between survival and hope. Even when her own strength felt like it might break, she kept going, because surrendering wasn't an option. Their lives depended on it, and she had no one else to rely on but herself. In every exhausted sigh, in every hesitant smile to strangers, she carried the life she never chose, the life she had to protect, and the unshakable fear that one wrong decision could undo everything she was fighting to hold together. With trembling hands, she typed the words that felt heavier than any burden she had ever carried. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I don't know who else to ask. I need help buying formula for my baby. Anything would help. Thank you." Her thumb hovered over the send button for a moment longer, her chest tight with shame, before finally pressing it. The message whooshed into the digital void, and almost immediately, a wave of regret crashed over her. What had she done? She had crossed boundaries, sent a plea into the unknown, and exposed her desperation to a stranger. Her eyes darted to the corner of the screen, the little circle that meant message sent, and she wished she could take it back. Every scenario played out in her mind: mockery, anger, rejection. Her cheeks burned as the baby whimpered in her arms, making the room feel even smaller, the walls pressing in with judgment she imagined in every shadow. She clenched her phone tighter, willing herself not to check, telling herself maybe no one would even read it. Maybe she could erase the evidence of her shame. Then, a soft chime broke her spiraling thoughts. A reply notification blinked on the screen. Her breath caught, fingers shaking. She tapped it open, expecting sarcasm or anger. Instead, the words were polite, measured, almost curious. Her heart raced so fast she could feel it in her throat. The simple act of opening that reply transformed the quiet despair of her night into a fragile thread of hope. Nothing had prepared her for the possibilities this single text might unlock. In a towering glass penthouse overlooking the city, the billionaire sat in a leather armchair, his gaze scanning the skyline but his mind elsewhere. Wealth surrounded him in every direction: polished marble floors, gold accents glinting in the ambient light, walls lined with rare art that had cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Yet despite the opulence, there was an unmistakable emptiness. Expensive wines, private chefs, luxurious cars. None of it filled the hollow quiet that haunted him when he was alone. Success and power had come early, but companionship had always been fleeting. Business associates, sycophants, and hangers-on populated his life, but genuine connection was a rarity he had long since stopped searching for. Part of him almost ignored the incoming message. He received dozens of texts daily, requests for loans, investments, charity scams, and attention-seeking strangers. Each one was a test, a trap, or a disappointment. He had grown cynical over time, developing a thick wall of skepticism around every plea. Yet when he glanced at the screen, something about this message made him pause. The words weren't polished or rehearsed. There was no flattery, no manipulation, just raw honesty, tinged with vulnerability and desperation. Curiosity stirred where suspicion normally lived. He read the message again, noting the small details, the trembling language, the mention of a baby, the urgency that wasn't exaggerated. Something inside him urged him to respond, to acknowledge the humanity behind the screen. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of intrigue that wasn't financial or strategic. Instead of dismissal, a faint, uncharacteristic pull toward understanding began to take root. A simple, desperate text had reached past his guarded world of wealth and isolation, hinting at a story that might be far more real than anything he had encountered before. He tapped out a quick question, his fingers steady despite the curiosity fluttering inside him. "How old is your baby?" The text was simple, almost clinical, but she responded with careful honesty. 8 months. She's just starting to sit up on her own." No pleading, no exaggerated details, just truth. Her words carried dignity even in desperation, a quiet strength that resonated far more than he expected. Minutes passed as they exchanged more messages. He asked questions that many might consider intrusive, but she answered with calm patience, never complaining, never begging. Each reply was measured, almost like a bridge being built with words alone. Her life was chaos. He could sense it even through the tiny bursts of typing, and yet she carried herself with an inner resilience that refused to crumble under the weight of circumstance. From her apartment came the faint cries of her baby, piercing the digital connection with the stark reminder of her reality. He imagined her multitasking, soothing the child with one hand while typing carefully with the other, every pause marked by the baby's wails. In contrast, he sat in perfect silence, surrounded by luxury and order, the world around him controlled and pristine. Yet in this exchange, those two vastly different realities collided, creating a tension that neither could ignore. She described feeding routines, bedtime struggles, and the little victories of daily survival. He listened, through words on a screen, through the tiny windows of text, and realized how little he had known about life outside the bubble of his wealth. It wasn't pity that formed, nor charity. It was connection, raw and unfiltered, built on honesty and humanity. By the time the night had deepened, a subtle bond had begun to grow. They were two worlds apart in circumstance. Yet here, through shared words and glimpses into each other's lives, something unspoken emerged: understanding. She trusted him with truths she had rarely shared, and he found himself caring, not for a story, not for a message, but for a life that had so long gone unnoticed. A single conversation, simple and sincere, had begun to change them both in ways neither could yet measure. He paused before typing, considering the right words. When the message finally appeared on her screen, it carried a weight far heavier than any simple gesture of charity. "I want to help," he wrote, "but not just with money. I can provide what your baby needs, safely and reliably. No strings attached. You don't have to explain anything more than you already have." The offer was simple, but in her world, it felt extraordinary, almost unreal. Her first reaction was instinctive refusal. Pride and fear clashed inside her. Accepting help from a stranger, especially one so wealthy, felt humiliating. She worried about being judged, about losing control, about appearing weak or desperate. She typed out polite refusals, explaining that she could manage, that she didn't want anyone else to worry about her. But even as she sent the messages, a tiny voice inside her whispered that her baby deserved more than she could provide on her own. He responded not with pressure, but with respect. He reassured her that there were no expectations, no judgment, and that her dignity would remain intact. Clear boundaries were set, not as rules to follow, but as promises that she would retain her autonomy, and that help would come without shame. Each message carried thoughtfulness, care, and understanding, bridging the gap between two lives that had never intersected before. Finally, she agreed. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't immediate, but she allowed herself to accept the help, for her child's sake, for the chance to ease their suffering even slightly. Neither of them realized, at that moment, how monumental this decision truly was. One act of generosity, combined with trust, had begun a chain of events that would transform their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. A simple offer, a courageous acceptance, and the first step toward hope had been taken. The first box of formula arrived on her doorstep early one morning, neatly packaged and accompanied by a polite note reminding her it was meant only to help her child. She stared at it for a long moment, hardly daring to believe that someone could care enough to send it. Within days, groceries followed: fresh fruits, vegetables, diapers, and baby essentials, everything she had been struggling to afford for months. Then came the rent support, quietly deposited, allowing her to breathe without the constant fear of eviction. For the first time in years, she felt a fragile sense of stability settling over her life. From his penthouse, he watched it all unfold, never imposing, never asking for anything in return. There were no cameras, no conditions, no hidden motives, just careful, deliberate acts of help that respected her dignity. He observed quietly, satisfied to see the changes taking root without interfering. It was a new kind of connection, invisible, protective, and steady, yet utterly transformative. Her confidence began to return slowly. Where she had once hesitated, doubted, and feared every step, she now found herself making decisions with clarity. She could plan meals without calculating every penny. She could pay the bills on time, and she could smile when her baby laughed without feeling a pang of guilt. With each passing day, hope became less fragile and more enduring. Her baby, once restless and undernourished, began to thrive. Tiny milestones, first giggles, rolling over, reaching for toys, marked a slow but steady improvement in their life. She watched with a mixture of relief and awe, realizing that the world could indeed change for the better, sometimes in ways one never expects. What had started as simple help had transformed into protection, a lifeline that allowed both mother and child to grow stronger, more confident, and ready to face a future they had never dared to imagine before. As the days passed and their messages deepened, he began to learn more about her life, details she had shared cautiously, as if testing the waters of trust. At first, it was small: the exhaustion, the long hours, the constant struggle to keep her baby fed and safe. But soon, she opened up about the man who had promised her the world and then vanished, leaving her to face life's hardships alone. The father of her child had disappeared when she needed him most, abandoning both responsibility and compassion, leaving her to navigate a merciless world without guidance or support. The injustice of it all hit him hard. He read her words, picturing the countless nights she had cried herself to sleep while the world went on, oblivious. He imagined her pleading silently with fate, facing judgment from strangers and family alike, struggling to survive in a society that often showed no mercy to women like her. Her courage, resilience, and dignity despite every hardship were impossible to ignore, and they pressed heavily on his conscience. As he absorbed the story, memories from his own childhood began to resurface. He remembered the absence of care, the feeling of helplessness, the longing for someone to notice, to step in and make things right. He felt a strange kinship with her struggle, a recognition that suffering could be lonely and relentless, no matter how different the circumstances. Suddenly, the help he had been offering was no longer about charity or curiosity. It had become personal. Every act of support, every package delivered, every reassuring message was now charged with meaning beyond generosity. It was about righting a wrong, however small, in a world that had been unfair to her for far too long. The detached fascination he had felt before now turned into deep empathy, and with it came a commitment that went far beyond distance or wealth. This was no longer just giving. It was becoming part of her life, her fight, and her story. The day they finally agreed to meet, the air felt heavier than usual. She arrived first, dressed simply, her baby bundled in a soft blanket, eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. Her hands shook slightly as she held the infant closer, unsure of what to expect from the man who had suddenly become such an unexpected part of their lives. He arrived moments later, impeccably dressed, but carrying none of the usual arrogance that his wealth often afforded him. Instead, he approached cautiously, aware that this meeting wasn't about money or status. It was about human connection, and that carried a weight he had never felt in a boardroom or penthouse. The initial moments were awkward. Words stumbled over themselves as they tried to bridge months of digital conversation into face-to-face interaction. She offered a polite smile. He nodded, and for a while, the silence between them was louder than any greeting. Then, slowly, warmth began to creep in. It wasn't the polished charm of romance novels or fairy tales. It was genuine, raw, human emotion. They laughed softly at small shared memories from their messages, noticed details about each other that had gone unseen through screens, and realized the gravity of the bond that had grown from necessity into mutual understanding. When he finally held the baby in his arms, the shift inside him was undeniable. The infant's tiny fingers curled around his hand, the soft coos reverberating in the quiet room, and something inside him softened, long-forgotten tenderness, a protective instinct, and an unexpected surge of love that was not transactional, not conditional, just pure. He realized that these lives were no longer distant concepts or abstract messages on a phone. They were real, present, and now intertwined with his own. She watched him carefully, noticing the subtle changes in his demeanor, the care in his movements, and the gentle attention he paid to her child. In that moment, the boundaries of wealth and poverty, of past and present, blurred entirely. They both understood, silently yet profoundly, that this meeting was more than an encounter. It was the start of a permanent shift. Their lives had been rewritten, not by chance alone, but by the courage, trust, and vulnerability that had brought them together in a way neither could have anticipated. What had begun as a single desperate text had grown into something neither of them could have predicted. A wrong number, typed in the middle of a sleepless night, had rewritten two destinies. For her, it meant stability, hope, and the chance to raise her child without fear. She stood taller now, her shoulders no longer burdened with the constant weight of despair. Independence had been reclaimed, pride restored, and every small victory, grocery shopping without anxiety, formula in the cupboard, rent paid on time, felt monumental. For him, the experience revealed a purpose that no business deal or luxury could ever provide. Beyond wealth and influence, he discovered the profound impact of empathy, human connection, and meaningful action. It was a lesson in humility and understanding that money alone could never teach. Not every miracle comes wrapped in romance or dramatic gestures. Some arrive quietly, through compassion, patience, and trust, leaving lives irrevocably changed. as he watched her and the baby thrive. Both of them aware of the invisible bond formed through honesty and courage. It became clear that sometimes help doesn't arrive through charity or luck. It arrives from the most unexpected number, at the most unexpected time, and in the most unexpected way.